Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It connects billions, holds the sum of human knowledge, and has reshaped society in ways we're still struggling to comprehend. But where did it come from? It wasn't born in a flash of inspiration, but was forged in the crucible of the Cold War, nurtured in the halls of academia, and unleashed upon the world by a generation of visionaries and rebels. This is the untold story of the most transformative invention in human history, the Internet. In the annals of history, few conflicts are born in a single fiery moment. Most are preceded by a long, chilling quiet, a period of escalating tension, of shifting alliances and whispered promises, a political Cold War where the future of a nation hangs precariously in the balance. For 12th century England, this precarious peace was shattered by a tragic accident at sea, and the catalyst for civil war was set. The year was 1120. King Henry I of England, a formidable and ruthless ruler, was at the zenith of his power. His dominion was secure, his enemies vanquished. His legacy seemed assured through his only legitimate son and heir, William Adelin. But the White Ship disaster, a maritime catastrophe that claimed William's life, plunged the Anglo-Norman world into a succession crisis of unprecedented scale. Henry's grand design was in ruins. Without a male heir, the stability he had fought so hard to build was suddenly fragile. His only remaining legitimate child was a daughter, Matilda. In an age where a queen regnant was anathema to the established order, Henry made a revolutionary move. He compelled his barons, the powerful magnates of England and Normandy, to swear a solemn oath to recognize Matilda as his rightful heir. This act was the political equivalent of stockpiling arms. It was a declaration of intent, a line drawn in the sand. Yet, the oaths were given under duress, and their true loyalty remained a subject of intense speculation. For years, the realm existed in this state of suspended animation. On one side was the king's will and the sworn fealty to Matilda, a woman of formidable intelligence and imperial experience, having been the Holy Roman Empress. On the other was the deeply ingrained prejudice against female rule and the ambitions of powerful men, chief among them Henry's nephew, Stephen of Blois. The air grew thick with conspiracy. Every court gathering was a web of intrigue, every alliance a temporary convenience. The death of Henry IV in 1135 was not the cause of the war, but the catalyst, the spark that ignited the stockpiled gunpowder of resentment, ambition, and broken oaths, plunging England into the devastating conflict known as the Anarchy. Decades before the Internet, visionary J.C.R. Licklider imagined a galactic network, a system of interconnected nodes creating a seamless web of communication. Centuries earlier, King Henry I possessed a similar, albeit dynastic, vision. His was not a network of computers, but of blood power and territory, meticulously designed to ensure the perpetual stability of his Anglo-Norman realm. His grand strategy was to create a political network so robust, so interconnected, that it would be impervious to the shocks of succession and the ambitions of rival claimants. The central node in this network was, by necessity, his daughter, Empress Matilda. Following the death of her first husband, the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry recalled her to Normandy. She was no longer just his daughter. She was a political asset of immense value, a former empress with unparalleled experience in governance. To strengthen his network, Henry brokered a marriage that was as strategic as it was controversial. He wed Matilda to Geoffrey of Anjou, the heir to a powerful and historically rival county. The union was designed to forge a critical link, to pacify a troublesome border, and to create a formidable power bloc uniting Normandy and Anjou. This strategic alliance was meant to be the masterstroke of his dynastic architecture. The next step in realizing his vision was to bind the other nodes, the powerful barons, to his chosen successor. In 1127, and again in subsequent years, he demanded their oaths of fealty to Matilda. This was the protocol, the programming language of his feudal network, intended to ensure a smooth data transfer of power upon his death. He envisioned a future where his daughter, supported by her Angevin husband, and sworn to by every major English and Norman lord, would inherit a secure and unified kingdom. It was a breathtakingly ambitious plan, a galactic network of fealty and alliance designed to transcend the limitations of his own mortality. But like any complex system, it had a fatal vulnerability: the human element. The nodes, his barons, were not passive terminals. They were ambitious, treacherous, and deeply resistant to the idea of a female sovereign. The Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, or ARPANET, was not born as a single monolithic entity. It began with a few key nodes, distant but connected, forming the backbone of what would become a revolution. Similarly, when Stephen of Blois seized the English throne in 1135, shattering Henry I's succession plans, the resistance in favor of Empress Matilda did not materialize overnight. It began as a scattered collection of loyalists, the first nodes in a network of opposition that would eventually engulf the kingdom in civil war. In the immediate aftermath of King Henry's death, Stephen moved with lightning speed. He crossed the Channel, secured the treasury at Winchester, and had himself crowned king, all while Matilda and her husband Geoffrey were consolidating their position in Normandy. For a moment, it seemed his coup was a complete success. The majority of the English barons, conveniently forgetting their oaths to Matilda, acquiesced to his rule. But the network of loyalty Henry I had built was not entirely dead. It was merely dormant. The first node to activate was in the north. King David IV of Scotland, Matilda's maternal uncle, refused to recognize Stephen. Citing his own oath to his niece, he invaded northern England, championing her cause and signaling that Stephen's reign would not go unchallenged. Simultaneously, another crucial node began to form in the West Country of England. This was the domain of Robert, Earl of Gloucester, King Henry I's most prominent illegitimate son, and Matilda's staunchest half-brother. While initially paying nominal homage to Stephen, Robert was secretly laying the groundwork for rebellion. He was a powerful, respected, and strategic military commander, and his eventual formal defiance of Stephen in 1138 was the moment the opposition network truly came online. His castles in Bristol and the West became the central hub for the Angevin cause in England. These first connections, David in the north, Robert in the west, and Matilda herself consolidating power across the Channel in Normandy, formed the nascent ARPANET of the resistance. They were geographically separate, but united by a common protocol: the legitimacy of Empress Matilda's claim. Their actions began the slow, arduous process of building a coalition capable of challenging a crowned and anointed king. On October 29, 1969, The first message was sent over the ARPANET. The intention was to type Logan, but the system crashed after just 2 letters. Low. It was an incomplete, almost failed communication, yet it marked the beginning of a new era. 40 years before, in the autumn of 1139, Empress Matilda sent her own LO message to England. It was not a full-scale invasion, not a decisive blow, but a tentative, audacious landing that, like its technological counterpart, irrevocably crashed the existing system and signaled the true beginning of the war. For 4 years, the conflict had been a series of proxy battles and regional skirmishes. Matilda's supporters, led by Robert of Gloucester, had established a firm foothold in the west, but the Empress herself remained in Normandy, a queen in exile. Stephen, despite his initial success, struggled to impose his authority across the entire kingdom. England was fractured, but the 2 principal claimants had yet to meet on the field of battle. That all changed in September 1139. With a force of just 140 knights, Matilda and Robert of Gloucester crossed the English Channel. It was a gamble of epic proportions. This was not the grand army of a conquering monarch, but a small, elite force designed to be a spark, not a firestorm. They landed at Arundel on the Sussex coast, taking refuge in the castle of her stepmother, Adeliza of Louvain. The message was clear, though incomplete. It was, "Lo, behold, I am here. The rightful heir has returned to claim her inheritance." The audacity of the move sent shockwaves through Stephen's court. He immediately marched his army south and besieged Arundel Castle. But here, he made a critical error. Bound by a chivalric code, or perhaps a cunning political calculation, he allowed Matilda to leave the castle under safe conduct and travel west to join her half-brother Robert at Bristol. He may have believed it was better to contain his rivals in one region than to fight them on multiple fronts. Whatever his reasoning, the decision was catastrophic. Matilda's arrival, her LO message, had been received. She was no longer an abstract threat across the sea, but a physical presence on English soil, a living banner for her cause. Her small landing party had successfully crashed Stephen's tenuous hold on power. The anarchy had begun in earnest. The early vision of a computer network faced a fundamental challenge rooted in the technology of the day: the telephone system. Traditional voice networks operated on a principle called circuit switching. When you made a call, a dedicated, unbroken physical circuit was established between you and the person you were calling. This line remained open for the entire duration of your conversation, whether you were speaking or sitting in silence. While perfect for human conversation, this model was incredibly inefficient for computers. Computers communicate in short, intense bursts of data, followed by long periods of silence. Tying up an entire expensive circuit just to send a few kilobytes of data was a colossal waste of resources. A new paradigm was needed, and it arrived in the form of packet switching. Independently conceived by Paul Baran at the Rand Corporation in the US and Donald Davies at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK, this idea was revolutionary. Instead of a single, continuous stream of information, data would be broken down into small, uniformly sized blocks, or packets. Each packet would be bundled with a digital envelope containing the address of its final destination and its sequence number. These packets would then be sent out into the network individually. They could travel along different paths, weaving through the network like cars on a highway system, taking whichever route was most efficient at that moment. A computer at the destination would then collect these packets and, using their sequence numbers, reassemble them into the original message. This approach offered immense advantages. It was far more efficient, as multiple communications could share the same lines simultaneously, with packets from different messages intermingling. More importantly, it was incredibly robust. If one node or line in the network was destroyed or failed, packets could simply be rerouted around the damage. This concept of a decentralized, self-healing network was precisely what ARPA was looking for to build a communication system that could survive a military attack, laying the very foundation for the Internet's resilient architecture. As the 1970s dawned, the ARPANET was a success, but it was an island. Other experimental networks were emerging around the world, like the NPL network in Britain and the Cyclades network in France. Each was a marvel of engineering, but they all spoke different digital languages. They were unable to communicate with one another, creating a digital Tower of Babel. The dream of a global network of networks, an internetwork, required a universal translator, a common protocol that all networks could understand. This monumental task fell to two pioneers, Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn. Working together in the early 1970s, they designed the architecture that would become the very language of the Internet, the Transmission Control Protocol Internet Protocol, or TCP/IP. They ingeniously split the problem into two distinct layers. The Internet Protocol, or IP, acts as the global postal service. Its job is to handle addressing and routing. Each packet is given an IP address, like a letter with a street address, and IP is responsible for getting that packet from its source to its destination, navigating the complex web of interconnected networks. However, IP doesn't guarantee delivery. Packets can get lost, corrupted, or arrive out of order. That's where the Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP, comes in. TCP acts as the reliable logistics manager. It establishes a connection between the two communicating computers, breaks the larger message into numbered packets, and sends them off. On the receiving end, TCP checks that all packets have arrived, requests retransmission of any that are missing or damaged, and reassembles them in the correct order before handing the complete message to the application. The adoption of this two-part system was not immediate, but its power was undeniable. The U.S. Department of Defense mandated its use, leading to a historic event on January 1, 1983, known as Flag Day, when the entire ARPANET switched over to TCP/IP. This was the moment the modern Internet was truly born, creating a universal standard that allowed any network, anywhere in the world, to connect and communicate seamlessly. The ARPANET was conceived with lofty goals to share precious computing resources among universities and research centers. Its designers envisioned scientists in California remotely running programs on a supercomputer in Massachusetts. While this did happen, the application that truly captivated its early users and defined its culture was something far more personal, and at the time, almost trivial: electronic mail. In 1971, a programmer at Bolt, Beranek and Newman, named Ray Tomlinson, was working on a time-sharing operating system called 10X. It included a simple program that allowed users logged into the same mainframe to leave messages for one another. Separately, he had been experimenting with a file transfer protocol for sending files between connected computers on the ARPANET. In a moment of inspiration, Tomlinson combined the two. He modified the messaging program to send the message file over the network to a user's mailbox on a different computer. The system needed a way to distinguish a user's name from their host machine's name. Looking at his keyboard, he chose the E symbol, a character with little other use at the time, to serve as the separator. With this simple, elegant solution, the modern email address format, user a host, was born. The impact was immediate and profound. Email usage exploded across the ARPANET, quickly accounting for the vast majority of its traffic. It was the network's first killer app. It transformed the ARPANET from a sterile tool for remote computation into a vibrant medium for human communication and collaboration. Researchers could now discuss projects, debate ideas, and share findings almost instantaneously. This led to the creation of the first mailing lists, which served as primitive online forums for group discussions on specific topics, fostering a powerful sense of community among the geographically scattered pioneers of this new digital frontier. It was a clear demonstration that the true power of a global network lay not just in connecting machines, but in connecting people. While the funding and initial impetus for the ARPANET came from the U.S. military's desire for a survivable command and control network, its soul was forged in the halls of academia. The first nodes were not at military bases, but at leading research universities: UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. This academic environment proved to be the perfect incubator for the network's growth and evolution. Unlike a rigid, top-down corporate or military project, the ARPANET developed with a spirit of open collaboration, intellectual curiosity, and peer review. The culture was one of sharing. Programmers and engineers freely exchanged ideas, source code, and solutions to common problems. This ethos was formalized in the Request for Comments, or RFCs. Started by Steve Crocker, the RFC series became the primary method for documenting protocols, concepts, and observations about the network. Anyone could write an RFC, and the ideas were debated and refined by the entire community. This decentralized, merit-based system of governance was fundamentally academic and was critical to the network's rapid and robust development. As the network grew, its dual identity as both a military and research tool became complicated. The solution came in 1983, the same year TCP/IP was adopted. The network was officially split in two. The military communications traffic was migrated to a new, separate network called MILNET. The original ARPANET was now left primarily for the academic and research community. This transition was soon followed by another crucial development. The National Science Foundation, recognizing the network's immense value for scientific research, funded the creation of a new, higher-speed backbone called NSFNet in 1986. This new network connected supercomputing centers across the country and in turn connected to regional academic networks. The NSFNet backbone quickly surpassed the aging ARPANET in speed and capacity, eventually absorbing its traffic and leading to the ARPANET's decommissioning in 1990. The torch had been passed, and the Internet's center of gravity had shifted decisively from its military origins to the world of science and academia. The year 1141 dawned cold and bitter, a mirror to the state of England. The anarchy had frozen the kingdom in a state of perpetual conflict. King Stephen, ever the man of action, had marched north to besiege Lincoln Castle, which had been taken by the rebellious half-brothers Ranulph of Chester and William de Rumar. Stephen believed a swift, decisive blow in the heart of winter would crush this northern rebellion and consolidate his power. It was a gamble a king had to take, but one that would prove disastrous. Inside the city, Ranulph of Chester, a man whose loyalty shifted with the political winds, knew he was outmatched. He smuggled himself out of the castle and raced to find his father-in-law, Robert of Gloucester, Empress Matilda's illegitimate half-brother, and the supreme commander of her forces. Robert, the strategic heart of the Angevin cause, saw the opportunity Stephen had unwittingly presented. The king had isolated himself, his main army far from its southern power base. Robert gathered his forces, a formidable army of Matilda's supporters and Welsh mercenaries, and marched towards Lincoln. On February 2nd, the two armies faced each other across a frozen field outside the city walls. Stephen's advisors urged caution, pointing to ill omens and the enemy's superior numbers. But the king would not be seen to retreat. He gave a rousing speech, but his army was unsettled. The battle began with a thunderous Angevin cavalry charge that shattered the king's flanks, sending many of his key earls into a shameful flight. Yet, in the center, Stephen stood his ground. Dismounting his horse to fight alongside his infantry, he became a warrior king, a lion roaring in defiance. He wielded a great two-handed axe, felling men with every swing until the weapon shattered. Drawing his sword, he fought on, a lone figure of royal courage against a tide of enemies. But courage alone could not win the day. He was eventually struck from behind by a rock, stunned and overwhelmed. William de Cahagnes, a knight in Robert's service, seized him by his helmet and claimed the ultimate prize. King Stephen was a captive. As he was led away in chains to be presented to his cousin, the Empress, it seemed the war was over. The path to the throne was finally, unequivocally, clear for Matilda. With King Stephen imprisoned in Bristol Castle, the political landscape of England was transformed overnight. The capture of an anointed king was a shocking, almost sacrilegious event, and it sent waves of fear and opportunism throughout the nobility. For Empress Matilda, this was the moment of destiny she had been fighting for since her father's death. From her court in Gloucester, she began a slow, triumphal procession towards the heart of the kingdom. This was not a military campaign, but a political one. She needed to secure the allegiance of the one institution that could legitimize her rule, the Church. The key figure was Henry of Blois, Bishop of Winchester, and ironically, Stephen's own brother. Henry was a prince of the Church, a shrewd and powerful man whose primary loyalty was to its independence and authority. He had supported his brother, but Stephen's capture offered him a unique opportunity. He convened a great council at Winchester in April 1141. There, before the assembled bishops and abbots of England, Henry made his move. He denounced his own brother for mismanaging the kingdom and declared his support for Matilda. The clergy, swayed by Henry's influence and the reality of Stephen's imprisonment, formally elected Matilda as Domina Anglorum, the Lady of the English. It was a carefully chosen title. She was not yet Regina, or Queen. That honor required a coronation, traditionally held at Westminster in London. Domina granted her the full authority of a monarch, but it was conditional upon her ruling justly and respecting the Church's privileges. For Matilda, it was enough. She received the keys to the royal treasury at Winchester and began to grant lands and titles as a ruler. Barons who had hesitated now flocked to her banner, offering their allegiance. The great prize, the crown itself, was now just a short journey away in the city of London. Yet, as she prepared for this final step, the very qualities that had carried her this far, her imperial upbringing, her unbending will, and her belief in her absolute right to rule, were about to become her greatest liabilities. England was not the Holy Roman Empire, and its nobles and citizens were not accustomed to the autocratic style she had learned as an empress. Her triumph was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge. In June of 1141, Empress Matilda stood at the gates of London, the city that held the key to her coronation and the final seal of her victory. The city was a power unto itself, its wealthy citizens fiercely protective of their traditional rights and privileges, their liberties. They had been staunch supporters of Stephen, who had granted them a favorable charter. But with their king in chains, they had little choice but to negotiate with the ascendant empress. They sent a delegation to meet her, agreeing to accept her as their sovereign on one condition: that she confirm their ancient liberties, just as her father and Stephen had done. Here, at the pinnacle of her power, Matilda made a catastrophic error in judgment. Raised in the rigid hierarchy of the German imperial court, she viewed such negotiations as an affront. She was their rightful ruler by blood, not by the consent of merchants and tradesmen. She scornfully dismissed their request, her expression one of cold, imperial disdain. To make matters worse, she immediately levied a heavy tax, a tallage, upon the citizens to fund her court. It was an assertion of power that was both politically deaf and deeply insulting. While the Empress was alienating her potential subjects, another Matilda was proving a far more astute political player. Stephen's wife, Queen Matilda of Boulogne, had not despaired. From her lands in Kent, she had rallied a loyalist army and was now camped just south of the river, sending agents into the city to stoke resentment against the arrogant Empress. Her appeals to the Londoners' loyalty to Stephen, combined with the Empress's own haughty demands, created a volatile explosion of fury. As Matilda sat down to a banquet in Westminster, preparing for her coronation, the church bells of London began to toll. It was not a call to prayer, but a call to arms. An enraged mob, armed with whatever they could find, poured out from the city gates. A chronicler wrote that they swarmed like angry wasps from a hive. Warned at the last possible moment, the Empress and her entire court were forced into a humiliating and panicked flight, barely escaping with their lives. They rode hard for the safety of Oxford, leaving behind their feast, their baggage, and their dreams of a crown. The gates of London had slammed shut in her face. The flight from London was more than a humiliation. It was a strategic disaster. Matilda's authority, so carefully constructed after the Battle of Lincoln, was shattered. Her aura of invincibility was gone, replaced by the image of a ruler rejected by her own capital. From her new base in Oxford, she plotted her revenge. Her anger focused on the man she blamed for her reversal of fortune, Henry of Blois. The Bishop of Winchester, who had proclaimed her Lady of the English, had quickly switched his allegiance back to his brother's cause following the London fiasco. For Matilda, this was an unforgivable betrayal. In the late summer of 1141, she gathered her forces and marched on Winchester itself, determined to corner the bishop in his own lair. She quickly seized the royal castle in the city, but Henry retreated into his heavily fortified palace at Wolvesey and sent out urgent calls for aid. The call was answered by Queen Matilda. A formidable and relentless leader, the Queen had assembled a powerful army of Stephen's remaining supporters, Flemish mercenaries, and a large, vengeful contingent from London. They marched on Winchester, and in a brilliant strategic reversal, surrounded the Empress's army. The besieger had become the besieged. For 7 weeks, a desperate struggle raged within the city. Supplies dwindled, and the Angevin position became untenable. A breakout was their only option. On September 14th, Matilda's army attempted to fight its way out. The retreat quickly turned into a catastrophe known as the Rout of Winchester. The Royalist forces fell upon the disorganized column, scattering them in chaos. The Empress herself was forced into a desperate and undignified escape. Separated from her guards, she fled for her life, riding astride a horse like a man until she reached the safety of Devizes, physically and emotionally exhausted. But her most trusted ally was not so fortunate. Her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, the rock of her cause, the brilliant general who had held her faction together, was captured while conducting a valiant rearguard action to ensure her escape. The Empress was free, but she had lost her queen from the chessboard. The Royalists now held a prisoner whose value was equal to that of the king himself. The war, which had seemed all but won just months before, was now set for a dramatic reset. With King Stephen in chains following the Battle of Lincoln, the path to the throne seemed, for the first time, truly clear for Empress Matilda. England was before her, a prize to be claimed. But a crown is not won by a single battle. It is forged in the fires of consensus and cooled by the waters of popular support. Matilda's task was now to assemble a mosaic of allegiance, piecing together the disparate, self-interested, and often conflicting shards of the English nobility, the church, and the increasingly powerful merchant class. Her first and most important stop was London, the heart of the kingdom. In the spring of 1141, she arrived at its gates, not as a conqueror, but as a petitioner seeking acceptance. She had been proclaimed Lady of the English by a clerical council at Winchester, a title that was a significant step, but fell short of Queen. The final piece of the mosaic, the coronation itself, had to be placed at Westminster Abbey. This was her chance to present a new interface for English governance, one based on legitimate hereditary right. Yet, the user experience she offered proved deeply unpopular. The Londoners, wary of her reputation for haughtiness, approached her with a request to lower the heavy taxes imposed by Stephen. Matilda, accustomed to the absolute authority she wielded as Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, dismissed them with cold disdain. She saw their request not as a negotiation, but as an affront. This single act of political tone-deafness was catastrophic. She failed to understand that ruling England required a different approach than ruling in Germany. Support for her began to crumble almost immediately. The mosaic she was trying to build fractured before her eyes. The barons, the bishops, and the citizens were the individual tiles, and they would not be forced into a pattern they did not accept. Stephen's queen, another Matilda, was rallying forces in the southeast, providing a compelling alternative. The Empress's brief moment of ascendancy was built on a foundation of sand, and her own imperious nature was the wind that began to blow it all away. London, the greatest prize, slammed its gates in her face, and she was forced into a humiliating retreat. her new browser for governance rejected by the very people she needed to adopt it. The rejection by London triggered a frantic reversal of fortune, a bursting of the speculative bubble that had surrounded Matilda's claim. The period that followed was less a calculated war of strategy and more of a chaotic gold rush, where lords and knights scrambled for the most valuable commodity of the age: land. Allegiance was the currency, and it was traded with dizzying speed. Barons who had rushed to support Matilda after Lincoln now saw her stock plummeting and quietly began hedging their bets, reopening communications with the Queen's loyalist forces. The entire country was a volatile market of shifting loyalties, with personal enrichment being the primary motive for many of the key players. In this chaotic environment, Matilda and her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, made a critical error. They pursued the Bishop of Winchester, Henry of Blois, King Stephen's own brother, who had initially supported Matilda, but had since switched his allegiance back. They besieged him at his castle in Winchester, hoping to eliminate a key opponent and seize his immense wealth. But they had overextended themselves. Queen Matilda of Boulogne, Stephen's wife, a formidable commander in her own right, arrived with a loyalist army, turning the tables on the besiegers. What began as a siege by Matilda's forces turned into a siege against them. The Angevin army was trapped. The retreat from Winchester in September 1141 became a full-blown disaster known as the Rout of Winchester. It was a panicked flight, a desperate scramble for survival. In the chaos, Matilda herself barely escaped, carried on a horse litter, exhausted and terrified. Her most loyal supporter and brilliant commander, Robert of Gloucester, was not so lucky. He was captured while fighting a rearguard action to ensure his half-sister's safety. The gold rush had ended in ruin. The Angevins had lost their most valuable asset. The Loyalists now held the ultimate bargaining chip, leading to the inevitable conclusion: a prisoner exchange. In November 1141, Robert of Gloucester was traded for the release of King Stephen. The board was reset. The anarchy, far from being over, was guaranteed to continue, bloodier and more desperate than ever. With King Stephen free and back on the throne, the conflict entered a new and grinding phase. The anarchy was now a direct war between two competing operating systems for the English crown. A brutal browser war where market share was measured in castles held and territory controlled. Stephen, the incumbent, had reclaimed his position, but his platform was unstable, plagued by broken promises and rebellious barons. Matilda, the challenger, offered a system based on legitimate succession, but her user base was concentrated in the West, and she had failed to achieve a nationwide installation. The years that followed were defined by this fierce competition. Castles were taken and retaken, towns were burned, and the countryside was laid to waste as each side sought to uninstall the other. The defining moment of this technological and military stalemate came in the winter of 1142. Matilda had established her court at Oxford, a formidable stone fortress that served as her central processing unit. Stephen, determined to eliminate his rival once and for all, marched on the city and laid siege to the castle. For 3 months, the war was waged around these stone walls. Stephen's forces battered the defenses, while Matilda and her garrison held firm against the onslaught and the encroaching starvation. As Christmas approached, with supplies exhausted and no hope of relief, the situation became desperate. Matilda's cause was on the brink of being permanently erased. What happened next became the stuff of legend. On a freezing, moonlit night, with the ground covered in snow and the nearby River Thames frozen solid, Matilda and 3 loyal knights clad themselves in white cloaks. They were lowered from a tower by ropes, their white figures camouflaged against the snow. They crept past the unsuspecting sentries of Stephen's army, crossed the frozen river on foot, and walked miles through the bitter cold to the town of Abingdon, where they found horses and safety. It was an astonishing feat of courage and endurance. While she had survived, the escape was a strategic retreat, not a victory. She had lost her key stronghold in the heart of England. The Browser Wars would continue, a war of attrition with no clear winner. But Matilda's platform had been forced from the mainstream, now operating from the margins. Its core code of legitimacy still intact, but its reach severely limited. Matilda's daring escape from Oxford saved her life, but it marked a turning point in her campaign. The relentless years of war had taken their toll. The great barons were weary of the endless conflict, and the country was bleeding. The grand search for a decisive victory, for a final blow that would place her on the throne, was proving fruitless. The momentum had stalled. A profound blow came in 1147 with the death of her staunchest ally, her illegitimate half-brother, Robert of Gloucester. He had been the architect of her military strategy, the anchor of her cause, and her most trusted advisor. Without him, her campaign in England lost its heart and its head. It was at this point that Matilda's personal ambition began to transform. The search was no longer for everything for herself, but for everything for her son. The objective shifted from her own coronation to securing the inheritance for the young Henry Plantagenet. He was the future. He was the new search query that might finally yield a lasting result. Henry had first come to England as a boy in 1142, and he returned with a small mercenary force in 1147 and again in 1149. These early expeditions were failures in a military sense, but they were invaluable as a learning experience. They introduced the young prince to the English political landscape and allowed the West Country barons to see the capable and energetic young man who represented the future of their cause. In 1148, recognizing that her presence in England was now more of a liability than an asset, Matilda made her final journey across the Channel. She left England for the last time, never to return. Her personal war for the crown was over. She retired to Normandy, but she did not retire from the fight. Her new role was to consolidate the family's vast continental holdings in Normandy and Anjou, creating a powerful and stable base from which Henry could one day launch his own decisive campaign. The search for everything had been redefined. It was no longer about one woman's right to rule, but about the founding of a dynasty that would change England forever. The anarchy was more than a war between two cousins. It was a profound and brutal social revolution that tore the fabric of Anglo-Norman England apart. For decades, the kingdom had operated under a rigid, top-down feudal structure, established by Matilda's father and grandfather. The king's law was absolute, his authority unquestioned. But with two monarchs vying for control, that central authority evaporated, creating a power vacuum that unleashed chaos. This wasn't merely a political crisis, it was a societal collapse. The very concept of loyalty, the bedrock of the feudal system, became fluid and transactional. Barons who had once sworn fealty to a single king now found themselves pledging allegiance to whichever claimant offered them more land, more power, or was simply closer with an army. This constant shifting of allegiances shattered the old order. Local lords, no longer fearing royal justice, became petty kings in their own right. They built hundreds of unlicensed or adulterine castles across the land, using them as bases to terrorize the countryside, extort money from travelers, and wage private wars against their neighbors. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a contemporary record, paints a harrowing picture of this revolution from the bottom up. It speaks of a time when men said openly that Christ and his saints slept. For the common person, the war was an unrelenting nightmare of plunder, famine, and violence. Fields went unplanted, villages were burned, and justice was a forgotten luxury. The revolution also extended to the highest echelons of power and challenged the most fundamental social norms. Matilda's claim itself was revolutionary. The idea of a woman ruling England in her own right was a seismic shock to the patriarchal system. Her struggle forced the nobility and the church to confront a question they had never considered. Could a queen command the same authority as a king? While her gender was used against her, her perseverance in the face of this opposition represented a radical challenge to the established order, prefiguring a social evolution that would take centuries to fully unfold. In the 12th century, information was power, and the war between Matilda and Stephen was fought as much by messengers on horseback as by knights on the battlefield. Lacking satellites or telegraphs, each side relied on its own version of the Internet in your pocket, a complex, fragile, and indispensable network of human communication. This network was the central nervous system of their war effort. Every strategic decision, from laying a siege to arranging a truce, depended on the timely arrival of intelligence carried in the pouch of a rider or concealed in the robes of a monk. A single message could mean the difference between victory and disaster. Consider Matilda's dramatic escape from Oxford Castle, besieged and surrounded by Stephen's forces. Her survival depended entirely on her intelligence network informing her of the weather, the state of the frozen river, and the deployment of Stephen's sentries. The message confirming her safe arrival at Abingdon was a critical data packet successfully delivered across a hostile network. This medieval internet was built on trust and loyalty. Matilda's connections across the channel were her greatest asset. Messages flowed constantly between her supporters in England and her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, in Normandy. These dispatches contained requests for troops, updates on baronial allegiances, and crucial financial information. This cross-channel bandwidth gave her a strategic advantage Stephen struggled to match. Spies were the search engines of this era, gathering data on enemy movements, morale, and resources. Merchants, pilgrims, and priests all served as unwitting or intentional nodes in this information web, passing gossip and news from town to town. But this network was slow and vulnerable. A messenger could be captured, a letter intercepted, or a ship delayed by storms. False information, the 12th century equivalent of fake news, was a potent weapon used to lure enemies into traps or sow dissent within their ranks. For nearly 2 decades, England was a landscape where the fate of the crown was carried in leather satchels and whispered in secret. A kingdom won and lost by the speed and reliability of its human internet. Long before silicon chips and algorithms, the big data that determined the fate of England was land. The kingdom's most comprehensive database was the Domesday Book, a meticulous survey commissioned by Matilda's grandfather, William the Conqueror. It was an extraordinary record of every manor, village, and hide of land in the country, detailing its value, its resources, and its ownership. The anarchy can be understood as a brutal, 2-decade-long battle for control of this database. Every castle seized, every county captured, and every baron who switched allegiance was an edit to the living record of power in England. Matilda and Stephen were not just fighting for a crown. They were fighting to become the chief administrators of the nation's most critical data set. Their strategies were entirely data-driven. Before launching a campaign, their councils would analyze the map of allegiances. Which magnate controlled the strategic castles along the Thames? How much revenue could be extracted from the shires of the Southwest? Who held the deeds to the vast estates of a recently deceased earl? This was the calculus of medieval warfare. The primary instruments for manipulating this data were royal charters. Both Matilda and Stephen issued a torrent of these documents, granting lands and titles to win or reward support. Each charter was a transaction, an update to the Domesday Ledger. A grant to the Earl of Essex might secure his loyalty for a season, but it would infuriate a rival who coveted the same lands. This constant rewriting of ownership data created a tangled and contradictory web of claims that fueled the conflict for years. The war itself was a violent audit of the system. It revealed the weaknesses in a structure where data, land ownership, was concentrated in the hands of a few powerful magnates. When these key data holders became unreliable, the entire system threatened to crash. Ultimately, the victor would be the one who could not only conquer the land, but also legitimize their control over its data, ensuring that their grants and titles were the ones that would be recognized as the official record for generations to come. After nearly 20 years of relentless war, England was exhausted. The barons were weary of the chaos, the church yearned for stability, and the land itself was scarred and impoverished. The conflict had reached a stalemate. It was in this environment of fatigue and frustration that the next frontier for England began to emerge. This new era would not be defined by Matilda wearing the crown, but by a far greater, more lasting victory, securing the throne for her bloodline. The turning point was the arrival of her son, the young, dynamic, and formidable Henry Fitz-Empress. He represented a future beyond the bitter rivalry of the previous generation, where Stephen was seen as a weak king who had presided over chaos and Matilda was viewed with suspicion by a misogynistic nobility. Henry was a fresh start. He was a skilled warrior and a shrewd politician, embodying the strength of his Norman and Angevin heritage. The final act of the war played out not in a climactic battle, but in a series of negotiations culminating in the Treaty of Wallingford in 1153. Under the terms of this landmark agreement, Stephen would remain king for the remainder of his life, but he officially named Matilda's son Henry as his heir. It was a masterful political solution. Stephen kept his crown, but Matilda won the future. The next frontier was the Plantagenet dynasty. Matilda retired to Normandy, but her role was far from over. She acted as regent for her son, governing his continental domains with the wisdom and authority she had honed over a lifetime of struggle. She was no longer just the claimant, but the revered matriarch of a new royal house, an elder stateswoman whose counsel was sought and respected. When Stephen died a year later, Henry ascended to the throne as King Henry II, unopposed. The anarchy was over. Matilda had not won the crown for herself, but she had conquered a kingdom for her son. Her legacy was not a title, but a dynasty that would rule England for over 3 centuries and forge one of the most powerful empires in European history. She had fought for the throne, and in the end, had created one.